2020, and we'll be working to provide you with the tools and assistance to help remove the challenges to the storage market here in New York City. The agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the Smart DG Hub. We'll talk about the progress to date. We'll talk about the energy storage permitting guidelines. We'll give you an introduction to that. We'll talk about some of the changes that you'll see in the new guideline and how the overarching process and the DOB Bulletins and the FDNY rule have supported changes in the processes here in New York City. We'll talk about some next steps, and we'll provide some opportunity for Q&A. So why CUNY? We are acting as an objective, trusted third party, able to bridge the turnovers and administrations and leadership at various agencies. We've been partnering with the City of New York since 2006 to remove the barriers of solar integration. And in 2013, we expanded those efforts to include storage, and the Smart DG Hub was formalized. New York City now has one of the fastest growing urban solar markets, and storage is expected to follow. We'll show you an interesting chart shortly. This is our collaborative platform. Convening the right stakeholders and end users is key, and ensuring we're all at the table to affect change is imperative. So thank you all for being with us today. If you take nothing else from today, please remember we're here to answer your questions and reach out to us if you have any thoughts about what is needed in the marketplace. The Smart DG Hub over the last few years has been funded and has been working in partnership with the Department of Energy, the State of New York, and the City of New York. Wow, we have a lot of folks that are joining, so I apologize for the beeps as I'm speaking, but we haven't figured out how to mute that. We house the Ombudsman program for solar and storage here in the city, and you can always reach out to us for technical assistance. You'll hear from two of our ombudsmen today, Daniela Leiper and Mike Bose. We also initiated the NYC Solar Roundtable as well as the DG Hub Roundtable. If you've not added your name to the roundtable, please reach out to any of us or send a note to smartdghub@cuny.edu. If you go to smartdghub.org, you'll see that we have many tools that are on the site, and there are resources there that we have developed collaboratively over the years. And we'll continue to develop and update those resources to help unlock the storage market. And I'll reiterate, if you have thoughts, if you have needs about tools or things that we should be developing, please reach out to us. New York City has really seen actually an increase in interconnection applications, and I think that's something that's important to point out because that's really where we are here, why we're here today. This is a nice uptick in interconnection applications, and we want to encourage you to submit your projects. Don't wait. There are plenty of other regions in the state that are submitting and utilizing those incentives, and we don't want to lose them. So please, continue to put those applications in and reach out to us. I'm going to pass over now control to Victoria Carey from DNVGL, who has been our partner in supporting our collaborative efforts to develop the tools and also to join our technical conversations with stakeholders. Over the last year, we have been meeting with FDNY, DOB regularly to develop the guide and work through issues that need to be addressed. So keep raising your questions, and we will all continue to convene the parties to ensure the transparency of the process and to conduct or support the analysis that is needed. It is important to know where we started and where we think we're going. So Victoria, if you can provide us with some background and the timeline of activities as an overview, we can move from there. Victoria.
Thanks so much, Tria. So as Tria noted, there's been a very large increase in the number of applications, and that doesn't happen in a void. It happens because of all of the folks who have been working collaboratively to move the process forward. And so we wanted to share this timeline to help guide why we think there's that hockey stick growth coming now, and how we think that we can continue to foster that collaborative environment, transparent process, and simplify that process as we move forward to ease the installation and integration of energy storage systems. So in 2016, a target was set in the city for 100 megawatt hours by 2020. Obviously, we're at 2020 now, and we know that the targets have changed and shifted and expanded and become even more aggressive, and we'll note that as we continue down this timeline. Right around that same time, based on some of that forward-moving pressure, that market pressure to really move on energy storage in the city, NYSERDA initiated a number of programs, and the program that Tria has noted that we've been engaged in with the stakeholder process with FDNY and Department of Buildings and Mayor's Office of New York City is to move the permitting process forward. So over that following year, we conducted these weekly meetings to try and garner understanding of exactly what was going on in the current processes, and also to bring technical understanding of what energy storage systems need to be installed safely and productively on the grid. So meanwhile, as we're working in New York City, during that same year, a lot of development was happening in parallel organizations. So IFC, which is the International Fire Codes, were published within that the end of that year of 2017 for 2018. This is a pretty watershed moment because that was the first fire code that actually incorporated any sort of real or relevant energy storage requirements for lithium-ion technologies installed as a sort of a bulk resource. That same year, NFP 855, the first draft of that, was released for public comment. NFP 855 is the National Fire Protection Association. 855 is the standard that's specifically associated with energy storage, all types of energy storage, different electrochemical types, mechanical types, etc. And it looks at the entire life cycle of an energy storage system. So as we were getting in the weeds, rolling up our sleeves in New York City to try and develop clear guidance and processes in the city for permitting energy storage systems, these other organizations were also coming out with these standards and codes. And so we were really moving together as an industry, with New York City kind of leading the charge on trying to get these practically permitted. Alongside that, UL 9540A was also released. UL 9540A will be talked about in a little bit more detail later in this webinar, but at its core, UL 9540A is a destructive testing method, and this is seen as a critical point in order to move the industry forward towards safe installations. In April 2018, we released the first edition of the New York City Outdoor Permitting Guidelines. This edition took the learnings of the previous year of intensive stakeholder sessions and developed a guideline that was intended to make the process more transparent and clear, both administratively and technically. So it gathered all of these disparate processes into one location and really gathered together all of the learnings that we could. But the work wasn't done there. The industry was continuing to move forward with new iterations of NFP 855, with new iterations of 9540A based on learnings from what had worked and what hadn't worked in the field. And the Department of Buildings issued its first storage bulletin, formalizing some of the learnings that had been found through the collaborative process that had happened in the prior year. Moving forward, there were new flowcharts that were developed. These flowcharts, I'm sort of casually mentioning them here. As Tria referenced, we're expecting to have future webinars that dive really into the technical nitty-gritty about the way that you can process UL 9540A testing data. And these UL flowcharts being developed kicked off that new prerogative and that new initiative. So just keeping that in the back of your mind as we moved forward, the industry was continuing to shift forward. New York City is not the only place installing energy storage, but it's certainly one of the most proactive places. So new energy storage targets were set in the state more broadly, which of course impact the city. And the Department of Buildings issued its second storage bulletin, clarifying based on learnings from the prior year's bulletin. We initiated at that same time the UL 9540A data analysis guide meetings, where we brought together technical subject matter experts, not just in energy storage, but in traditional firefighting methods, in gas detection, in fire suppression, in toxicity, as well as the critical authorities having jurisdiction to make sure that they had all the information they needed to understand what this test data would tell them and therefore how it could be applied to create safer systems in the city. Again, none of these things were moving forward by themselves. So that summer of 2019, there was a lot of activity. There was a state emergency rule that was published, putting into code requirements for energy storage systems across the state of New York. There was a NYSERDA guidebook published that was intended to create a model code and inspection guidelines so that folks across the state could benefit from the understandings that were garnered around energy storage over the prior years. Con Edison issued a bulk storage RFP, which really amped up the number of applications that were going to be anticipated coming into 2020. NFP 855 was finally published as a formalized and approved standard. So, all of these different factors then built into the continuing momentum towards the Department of Buildings Storage Zoning Bulletin and FDNY publishing their rule in October of 2019. Finally, as we come to today, we have gathered this webinar together in order to introduce you both to the permitting guides generally, but also to the updated permitting guidelines, which incorporate all of the learnings that we've talked through from our history, but most especially, as you see highlighted in blue, the rules that have been issued formally in the city since the execution of since the last publishing. This is not the end of the story. We're moving forward. Process improvements are continuing. Installations will certainly continue, which will further improve the processes. Technical assistance will always be available through Smart DG Hub. And these guidelines will continue to be refreshed and updated as new information is available. Most especially, I want to draw attention to the UL 9540 data analysis. So look out for those coming in the future. So you can go to the next slide, Daniela. So just to give anyone who's unfamiliar with the permitting guide generally, the 2018 permitting guide, it looks a lot like this, as does the 2020. Sort of the critical central feature of it was, again, this consolidation of all of the information from these various resources into a single actionable document. So this document includes, among other things, a detailed checklist, which you can sort of see laid out here, that talks through all of the different permitting forms, all of the technical requirements, and dives in deep into the various technical requirements. And we'll go into a little more detail in the next slide what some of those are. But it can go as high as this is the dollar amount that you need for a particular application to be submitted, to as detailed as this is the type of finish that you need on a sign that's going to be installed outdoors to notify people of some sort of hazard. So you can go to the next slide. At its highest level, it was published in 2018, as is probably apparent by the title, but it was published with the interaction and involvement of a variety of stakeholders. None of this was done in a vacuum. It was done taking the best knowledge that we have available around the subject matter, as well as practical understanding of processes and administrative requirements and safe practices from the agencies themselves, as I mentioned, including the Department of Buildings and the Fire Department, in collaboration with other agencies such as the Mayor's Office or Con Edison. Within this document, and this is something that is consistent from the 2018 to the 2020, there are a number of focus areas, but the goal is to encapsulate requirements throughout the life cycle of an energy storage system and put those into a reasonably understandable process and checklist. Addressed in here are life cycle management, so this might refer to things like commissioning, decommissioning, and installation guidelines, sizing differentiators, so differentiating the requirements for smaller systems for lithium-ion, that's under 20 kWh, medium systems, and large systems, understanding that those systems pose different threats and have different environments and therefore should be treated differently. Ventilation, exhaust, fire protection, siting, all of these are helped to be moved forward by understanding what testing data you have to make decisions about them, and as I mentioned earlier, getting down into the nitty-gritty, such as signage, and really, again, the administrative core of understanding what forms, what documentation, where do you mail things, who do you talk to, when do you talk to them, in what order, and how much is it going to cost you. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see here, as I've mentioned, there's multiple streams of folks that are involved in this process, and each of them is critical. They are, however, distinct agencies that have distinct processes. And so the goal of this guideline and the stakeholder process leading up to it was to bring those agencies together to talk through how their processes intersect, as well as to talk through what are the particular details following within your own organization that we can make sure that we highlight to smooth out the process for both external parties and internal parties. So if you go to the next slide, this is a feature, and there's not a huge change in this process list between the 2018 guide and the 2020 guide. And Daniela and Mike will talk through what those changes are. But I just wanted to throw up here the two different processes that are in place for small systems versus medium and large systems. For each of these processes, you'll see that there's a key differentiating the type of action that is taken. We'll clarify the acronym SOUP that often goes along with such permitting guidance. And then you also see where these different organizations intersect and what takes priority, or rather not priority, but what has to happen before something else has to happen. In the small systems, you can see that blue is indicating DOB interaction, green is indicating Con Ed, and red is indicating FDNY. And for the smaller system, FDNY is notified but not necessarily involved in the earlier parts of the permitting process. If you go to the medium and large systems, however, on the next slide, you'll see that FDNY is involved right up front. The submissions can proceed forward in parallel, with FDNY's approval letter being an important key feature to move forward in the other processes. Also, in the medium and large systems, annual inspections will be included as well. So I'm going to hand it off to Daniela at CUNY, who will talk through some of the DOB specific updates and bulletins that have influenced the 2020 guide. Daniela?
Hi, thanks, Victoria. So on the DOB side of the permitting equation, if you will, there have been 2 bulletins released since the publication of the original outdoor permitting guide. Now, as you know, the permitting guide wasn't formally adopted by the agencies as policy, but rather represented what they wanted to see as far as best practices in storage project applications. And as many of you might already be aware, the DOB permitting consists of 3 parts. There's the construction permit, the electrical permit, both of which are fairly standardized, and then also the OTCR approval, which is much more project specific. These are different units within DOB. They work together on storage permitting, but they do different things. So the first bulletin that was released just a year ago, January 2019, it didn't really differ too much from what was originally in the outdoor guide. The forms and the information that you need to submit are the same, but the bulletin mainly served to, first and foremost, to formally establish DOB's permitting process for storage projects on the books, and then also to better lay out the order and timeline of when you have to submit certain forms and project information, and more importantly, what intermediate approvals you need before proceeding to the next step. So here's a zoom in on this slide that just is from the updated outdoor permitting guide, which we'll be releasing shortly, with a small but important detail that we want to make sure project developers were aware of, which is that the OTCR conditional acceptance letter needs to be obtained before you can proceed with your construction permits. And then here are a few bullets, also just calling some specific details out on, again, not completely new, but useful to be aware of. E-filing is acceptable. The order of submissions and responses is laid out here in the next few bullets, as we just saw on the previous slide. IRB and BRB review are not required for lithium batteries. And then one other important point to note is that a zoning analysis, obviously near the bottom, the bullet that mentions zoning analysis, needs to be submitted along with the construction permit application. which I wanted to specifically mention because that leads me to the second of the DOB bulletins. And this one was released more recently, just this past September. And this addresses a fairly, significant gap in the information pertaining to how storage systems will be classified under existing New York City zoning. This one is definitely more dense and establishes a new protocol rather than just formalizing what had sort of already been outlined. It's a brief document, but it refers to a lot of important information within New York City zoning. In as much of a nutshell as you can do with this, it gives a usage designation to certain types of battery systems. And depending on the characteristics of your system, that will tell you if your battery project will require additional special permits or variants. This is all based initially on a key definition that's important for you to be aware of, which is the definition of accessory use versus non-accessory use batteries. The bulletin itself pertains only to non-accessory batteries, which are those that supply energy primarily to the grid, as opposed to accessory batteries, which supply energy primarily to the building on site. Otherwise, the bulletin, as I said, addresses non-accessory batteries, and there are some other characteristics that also will shape, whether you may need these additional special permits. That would be the battery project size, and then as well, of course, as the zoning district that you're building in. If the battery is below 10,000 square feet and is a non-accessory battery, it'll be considered what's called Use Group 6D, which is an electric utility substation. If it's above 10,000 square feet, and again, a non-accessory battery, it will be considered Use Group 17C, which likewise is a public utility, but it's essentially open-ended as far as size. Now, this is a document, a zoning matrix chart that my team here at the DG Hub put together in response to this bulletin. It essentially is an interpretation pulling relevant details out of the New York City zoning resolution and just kind of consolidating them into one document, and it's designed to provide developers with just an initial reference to look at to see, when you're doing site evaluations, what are the characteristics of your site and of your battery project, and the likelihood of whether you may indeed be required to pursue these other special permits or variances. So as you'll see, it's divided out into several categories. The battery type, again, accessory use versus non-accessory, and then by size. Here's the second column provides a couple of just use case examples, and then of course the zoning district, which is the third column, that is R is residential, C is commercial, of course, and M is manufacturing. And the standard permitting requirements, for FDNY and DOB will apply pretty much across the board, whereas the last two columns indicate where special permits, what types of projects and what sites might require special permits. So I just want to point out pretty basic but important details. In manufacturing districts, as you'll see across the board, manufacturing districts really have very little in the way of restrictions. So again, it's important when you're doing your site analysis to keep in mind, especially for these non-accessory. And of course, residential districts have the most restrictive usage, and you will be required to get a special permit, whether through the Board of Standards and Appeals or through the CPC, the City Planning Commission. So this is now available as of yesterday. It's published on our website on the by going to smartdghub.org. It's available for download and using, and we welcome any comments or feedback on that. And with that, I will now turn it over to Mike to go over FDNY.
Hey, thanks, Danielle. This is Mike Bose. I'm an engineer and DG Ombudsman here at Sustainable CUNY. Very quickly, we'll say that if you have any questions, please send them through the chat box, and we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A afterwards. So I'll be giving you a quick rundown of the newly enacted FDNY rule on outdoor stationary energy storage systems in New York City and highlight some of the key changes that are found in the updated 2020 version of the Outdoor Lithium-Ion Guide, which we've been speaking about. So in October, the FDNY released a rule on outdoor stationary storage battery systems. That's Rule 608-01, which provides requirements for energy systems located in New York City. The rule is greatly influenced by the core working group discussions during the development of the Outdoor Permitting Guide. Outlined in the rule are requirements around permitting, listing and testing standards, equipment approvals, and design requirements, all which give guidance to industry members looking to develop in the city. You can go to the next slide. So here we see a table given at the beginning of the rule document of designated system sizes for different battery technologies such as lithium-ion, lead-acid, flow batteries, along with size thresholds for small, medium, and large systems unique to each technology. Similar to the checklist in the Outdoor Permitting Guide, there's a chart that gives compliance requirements for each technology and size, as you can see on the right. And in our updated guide, we'll be identifying additional forms and processes as needed. Can go to the next slide. Here we see a list of important testing and listing standards, which must be conducted by a nationally recognized test laboratory. And examples are UL 1741, which looks at power conversion systems such as inverters, 1973, which tests resistance to abuse conditions in modules and units, and 9540, which looks at the system as a whole and conducts various mechanical, electrical, and environmental tests on the system. Additionally, when full-scale testing is required, as outlined in the table, systems must be tested to UL 9540A, which is a test developed to evaluate the thermal runaway and fire propagation properties of battery storage systems. Data from 9540A can then be used to inform installation requirements based on fire and explosion analyses that will be conducted by New York State certified professional engineers. Note that 9540A testing is required for all sizes of lithium-ion battery systems. And as Victoria alluded to earlier, we will be hosting webinars covering 9540A in greater detail coming up. You can go to the next slide. So here are some of the main design requirements which are detailed in the rule, including location, construction requirements, as well as enclosure design requirements. Many of these requirements are informed directly by 9548 test data. Examples include separation distances, physical protection requirements, as well as explosion mitigation and prevention measures such as deflagration venting in accordance with NFPA 68 and 69 respectively. Other distinctions around detection systems and manually operated smoke and gas purge systems are also given. And go to the next slide. So lastly, here are some of the key updates found in the upcoming 2020 edition of the Outdoor Lithium Permitting Guide. Included are some changes in terminology. For example, what was previously called the Letter of No Objection has been changed to Letter of Approval. Information on the Certificate of Fitness responsibilities for the system provider, clarifications on equipment approval forms, as well as decommissioning plans are also updated. Details around explosion mitigation, ventilation and exhaust systems, as well as suppression systems, seen as those, such as those seen on the previous slide, are also given. And as a final note, we suggest a preliminary meeting with the agencies prior to project submission. This gives them a heads up on the project that's coming, allows them to look over different details, make suggestions, and raise any red flags before you submit your application. If you're planning on submitting a project in New York City coming up, reach out to us and we can help initiate and facilitate those conversations. Great.
Okay. Great. So again, if you have questions around anything that we've said, I know we're covering a lot very quickly. Please submit questions into the chat box, and we'll try to go through them as best we can. You know, obviously, look, there's a lot more work to do, and we have some thoughts about what's next. Obviously, we're going to get this updated version of the outdoor guide out, and you'll be able to see that on the Smart DG Hub site. We're going to continue our ongoing agency support, and we're definitely already working on development of some templated applications and checklists, and I think that will really help us as we think about making sure that everybody is working from the same set of information. As you know, as you saw earlier with regard to the growth of the marketplace, we're continuing to gather information about projects submitted through DOB and FDNY and Con Edison, and we'll continue to track those projects, try to identify where we see challenges and try to knock those challenges down. We've also been working on UL 9548 data analysis methodology and guides, and that's really something that was suggested by many of you in our last stakeholder discussion. And we've developed some flow charts and some information regarding how to utilize data, and that will be a topic of a future webinar. But we also think that that will help us lead towards discussions of indoor installation, as the 9548 test data is, you know, clearly instrumental in helping DOB and FDNY understand what the large-scale testing says and how to apply that. And so we'll also try to develop some example calculations and how the data can be considered and consolidated. We remain here with our ombudsman, Mike and Daniela, in particular for technical assistance. Please, you know, call us, reach out to us, email us, and, you know, it's your feedback that helps guide us to understand what you're seeing as you go through your projects in real time. So if you let us know, you know, we'll feel it with you, and we'll work on ways to get through that process. And again, there'll be many webinars to try to explain these processes. We're really happy to see so many of you have joined this. And I do want to remind you that on March 27th, we have our Con Ed installer training. This is something that we've been doing every year in partnership with Con Ed that goes really through in great detail the permitting processes at DOB and FDNY and Con Edison, and NYSERDA will be there as well. So please make sure you have that in your calendars. Friday, March 27th, which will be at the Con Ed Training Center in Long Island City. Ultimately, this year, we're going to make sure we update those documents. We're going to work to improve the processes. We're going to look to try to make sure that we're expanding the installs here in New York City, and we're here to provide that technical assistance. So please, you know, continue to work with the DG Hub, because I think together we can make battery storage a powerful tool, pun intended, to create economic opportunities for vendors and for stakeholders and clients, and we can work together to mitigate climate change. So let's all stay working together closely in 2020 and beyond, and really help to move this market in that hockey stick growth we all know is going to happen. With that, I want to make sure you're all adding your questions into the chat box, and I know a few have come in. So why don't we start to address some of those? Daniela, maybe you can read the first, and we can sort of take.
Sure. I will start with the easiest question, which is whether these slides will be posted, and that is yes. We're also recording this webinar. So hopefully for those of you who might have had some audio trouble, you'll be able to at least catch up using them by listening to the recording of this.
Yes. And you will notice also when you jump on the smartdghub.org site, there are other webinars that have been recorded. We've had some webinars with UL that talk about 9540A and the other UL standards. Those are great refreshers for those of you that want to dig back in or deeper into the different standards. There have been some really good technical discussions that you'll find on.
Yeah, and certainly those of you also who are new to this, especially around the UL standards and the 9540A test methodology, what it is, how it is literally supposed to, be conducted and used, how the data is supposed to be collected and used. The webinars are, very step by step. So we think that they're a great learning tool if you're just, somewhat new to this topic area. The second question that came in, we're just looking through the list. The D. Somebody asked, does anyone know what the D in 6D is? That's for the zoning designation for non-accessory batteries. What is the D in 6D, and what is the C in 17C? So that information is buried quite deeply in the zoning resolution. I would be happy to send you links to where you can find that. If you want to provide me with your email address, you can reach out to the Smart DG Hub at cuny.edu email address. The shorter answer is the use group definitions are sort of separated out in the different zoning districts. So there will be some for residential. You'll find definitions within the commercial and manufacturing sections as well. So it's not necessarily that you'll be able to find all of those use group definitions in one single section in the zoning resolution. So I'd be happy to help. That will be an ombudsman task for me to take care of.
Our experience is that usually if one person has a question, lots of folks do. So we also encourage everyone to join the DG Hub roundtable, and then we can also make sure that we're putting information out on the roundtable that seems like it's going to impact lots of folks, and then you'll also all get the same information. I saw something about 10,000 square feet.
Right. A second question that came in was, is the 10,000 square foot, does that refer to space used by the battery containers, or the containers plus connecting equipment, such as transformers, inverters, switchgear, or is it the containers, the connecting equipment, plus the setback spaces and vacant space at the site? Now, our understanding early on is that it does include the entire system plus the required spacing on the site. So it will require certainly the setback spaces, but that I'd be happy to do a little bit more homework on that, just to determine more specifically details around the vacant space requirement. And then the next question that came in, we get this one fairly commonly. Is there a list of what battery brand names have 9540A testing? There is no, I just want to take the opportunity to point out, there's no approval that you get from the 9540A test. It's really a data collection test. There's no pass-fail criteria. So once the test is completed, you receive a report literally of the data of heat transfer rates, contents of the smoke that came out of the battery fire, that type of thing. But there's not pass-fail criteria, and we don't keep a list, at least right now, of batteries that have gone through 9540A testing. There's still a number of manufacturers that we're aware of who are undergoing the testing currently. But I did also want to point out that Mike mentioned earlier in the FDNY section, one of the newer updates in the FDNY rule is a requirement for this TTM2 form, which is to apply for equipment approval for use of particular equipment in New York City. And that's essentially the goal of the 9540A, getting a 9540A test is to ultimately get your equipment approved for installation in New York City. And that's a process in which the manufacturers would submit that form to get approval for the particular battery model that has been tested. So that is something that's kind of in development and will be formalized by FDNY. We don't really have a timeline on it, but at some point down the line, there will be a list published of equipment that is approved by FDNY to be installed in New York City.
Daniela, this is Victoria. Just to add on to that, I know that we mentioned it a few times previously, but one of the big developments that we're looking towards for the first part of this year is to make sure that we can share the learnings from the last year of conversations about how to analyze the UL 9540A data. And so, as was previously mentioned, that data can be used to determine appropriate spacings to various exposures. It can be used to determine what sort of suppression system is effective or acceptable. It can be used to determine if the adjacent walls are appropriately protected or what kind of exhaust or explosion management system you have. So the data is very useful, and we'll want to make sure that we're sharing the learnings that we have about how you can analyze that data to develop both a safe system and a system that will be acceptable through the permitting process. In addition to that, I did want to note that a lot of the work that I do outside of this particular exact job is due diligence work, and that any person who is looking to invest or purchase a battery should include, if they're looking to install in New York City, should include a requirement in their RFP or sort of bid requirements for the provision of the 9540A data, because it will be required for the submission. So I just wanted to note, sort of empowering folks to ask for that data because it's necessary for these applications.
Thanks, Victoria. One other, I'm just doing another question that came in, fairly simple one again, is where do we find the roundtable? That's an email announcement list that we maintain. So for anybody who wants to, who's not on it already, if you received the invitation for this webinar, that means you are on our announcement list. If you received it directly. If you did not receive it directly and you're not on our list, then just reach out to me again via smartdghub@cuny.edu, and I will be very happy to add you to the list. Another question says, to my knowledge, other than NEC, there is no manufacturer who has certification for 9540A. Is that correct? We, again, don't have sort of a very
but let's back up a second. There's no 9540A is not providing you with a certification. 9540A is a testing standard. So the question is, are other battery manufacturers going through the 9540A testing standard? And the answer is yes. Other companies are going through that, and you would have to talk to the manufacturers about where they are in that process and about what they're learning in terms of the data that's being provided to them based on the testing protocol that they're going through. It's the data that's coming out of 9540A that's going to serve as the information that will set the requirements associated with that particular battery. So that's why each battery model, in essence, will have to go through that 9540A testing.
Okay, another question just came in. I understand specifics are still to come, but do you know yet whether the TTM2 approval process can be part of the 9540A testing process, or will it need to be a completely separate submission?
Well, the TTM2 process is a New York City process, versus the 9540A testing protocol. But again, as I was saying, the data coming out of 9540A is what's going to set the requirements around, you know, your particular battery installation. And so once you've gone through, once a battery has gone through the 9548 testing, and there's a you know, a decision by the AHJs here in New York City about what should be required, that's when it can become, you know, a part of that listing, you know, for New York City. So 9548 is kind of a condition precedent, if you will, to being able to have that conversation with FDNY. I hope that's clear. Feel free to write a follow-up if it's not. Again, if anybody has any questions, you know, just put them right in that chat box. I see a couple more coming in, and you know, we can also create a Q&A based on the questions that have come in. There's some good ones here, and I think they'll be helpful to everybody. Go ahead, Daniela. Any other?
Well, somebody submitted kind of a general comment or question. The data from 9540A help you decrease separation distances, which is, you know, yes, is an accurate statement to say, because depending on the test results, that will essentially determine, you know, what the separation distances need to be. Not having it is not a blocker to install. Again, that is also correct. As of currently, the agencies are reviewing and approving energy storage applications and projects. And, you know, some of these are in the permitting and installation process. The requirement to get the testing is still there, but it's required, you know, essentially retroactively. You'd have to submit the data. And there, you know, there is the sort of factor involved in that, which is that if your data comes out and, you know, really indicates that other, say, you know, other stronger protections need to be added, then, you know, that may end up requiring you to, you know, do some retroactive work on your battery installation. But it is, you're correct when you say it's not a blocker. Not having the test data is not a blocker to project installations right now. Let's see, just looking through some of the other questions that are coming in.
Again, I want to just reiterate while Daniela is looking at the questions, if you're seeking to go through the process in New York City and you're up against a challenge, or there's a question that you need to have resolved, or you think you have information that will be helpful to the agencies in thinking about their requirements going forward, reach out to us. Let us know that. Don't just get frustrated by the process. Let us know, and that's what our ombudsmen are here to help you with. So if you've got a residential project and you're trying to get that through the DOB or the FDNY, reach out to us. Let us know what exactly you're hitting, and somebody just made a input indicating that they were trying to get a residential project through. Let's take a look at it. There's been a lot of discussion about requirements around the residential system, so there's information that we can all share and discuss.
Right.
Anything else?
Another question that just came in. We know from discussions with fellow companies that the testing agencies have faced challenges in completing the 9548 testing as it's outlined, leaving some parts not completed. So a few companies are discussing with them terms for completing or repeating tests in order to address each of the factors that are supposed to be measured. and the asker was just wondering if any of us could speak to that.
I guess I'm happy to speak to it just sort of generically. I guess the focus of this webinar was on the release of the guidelines. This particular set, the 2.0 set of guidelines, the 2020 guidelines that we're releasing, doesn't include the UL 9548 test data analysis. That's coming in a new revision down the line a little bit, as well as will be addressed in more detail in an upcoming webinar. As far as, speaking to exactly who's completed the testing, what exact challenges they have, as with any new testing standard, especially one that's integrating so many different system types, there's not just one type of lithium ion, there's not just one type of battery, you've got flow batteries, you've got lead acid batteries, there's a lot of different technologies and installation locations and things. And so developing a testing plan around that and a testing standard around that is certainly a complicated and an ongoing process. And I think that in those conversations where things are being retested and additional data is required, it's a growing pain, but it's, I think, a demonstration of the willingness to understand that there's a lot going on and there's a lot of information and insight that's needed. So again, there's been a lot of commentary about this on the side chat, but yes, this data will be used to figure out separation distances. This data is necessary to have a system installed in New York City, but is not necessarily a blocker to moving forward in the permitting application process. This data is available for lots of different technologies. I can't speak to any of the exact ones that I'm aware of that have been tested, but there's certainly not just one system that's been tested, and there's not just one manufacturer that knows how to complete an application. So we're going to work to continue to make that a more transparent process in the parts that we can. This CUNY collaborative effort, it's not a testing lab itself, so we can't test your batteries for you or anything like that as part of this process, but we can certainly help to understand what that data analysis methodology and that administrative process is. And again, sort of stay tuned. That's up and coming.
And and I would also say that to the extent that you're again, any challenge in the marketplace is a challenge in the marketplace. So we need to capture those issues, and we need to bring all the stakeholders together, including UL and testing labs, and make sure that if you're hitting snags in the process, that and multiple folks are hitting snags in that process, that's a transparent set of issues that that the agencies can be aware of too, so that whatever requirements they're placing upon you take that into consideration as well. So just ensuring that there's really good open communication, I think, is a really important part of what we need to do in order to open up this marketplace. Hopefully we will get there. Also, the more testing is done, the more experience the testing labs are going to have, I think, the less, hopefully the less issues we'll see along the way. I'm cognizant of the fact that there's just a couple of minutes left. Did you want to have a last question, Daniela?
One last question came in that actually kind of leads to the last thing that I want to leave everybody with. The question was 9540 without the A is being used nationwide. Why does New York City need the 9540 with the A? And I'll give you the long answer to that, which is that that's been really well, spelled out and addressed in the previous documents, mostly webinars that we have done in the last year, specifically on this topic. And they really drill down. I know we mentioned this earlier, but I kind of just want to drive it home a little bit more, that we really do have a wealth of really useful and highly detailed information, especially for people who are newer to this topic. And so I really want to just encourage everybody to, you know, come visit our webpage of resources. It's a whole library of really useful stuff that I think you'll find really informative and can catch you up on just a lot of activity that's happened over the past year under this project. So that's my plug for everybody. And
yeah, and there is obviously a difference in what 9540A is doing and what 9540 is testing for. So, you know, I think in this urban setting, FDNY and DOB have felt that they wanted to understand what large scale fire testing looks like, and that's really where 9540A comes in as opposed to 9540. But I would reiterate that there has been a couple of you know, really helpful webinars that UL participated in and presented at that really talked about their view of the difference between each of the standards and this testing protocol. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that to get their you know, viewpoint on why they created the 9540A testing protocol. So I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. There will definitely be another webinar follow-up on 9540A data specifically and the use of that data to try to help you know, ease any of the challenges that folks may be seeing. And we'll definitely, you know, talk more about the differences between the different standards that Mike, you know, referenced earlier, and we really, you know, appreciate everybody taking the time to dive into this and learn, you know, what you can about this New York City process and work it through with us. And again, I think, you know, communication and working together is going to be key in removing the barriers and challenges and any you know, issues that are being raised. So, you know, if you want to be a subject matter expert and help us uncover some of these issues, please reach out to us, and we look forward to future webinars, and hopefully we'll also see you at the Con Ed Training Center in March. Yeah. So thank you very much. It's 1 o'clock, and so we'll conclude here and look forward to future conversations. Bye.
Thank you.